In its heyday, James Mackie and Sons was the world's leading manufacturer of textile machinery. Despite its reputation for engineering excellence and the fact that it was a huge employer in Belfast, only those who worked for the company fully understood its greatness. As well as designing and fabricating machinery for textile mills throughout the world, Mackies were an important munitions producer in 2 world wars. Mackies survived bombing by the Luftwaffe and the Northern Ireland Troubles, and was eventually wound up in 1999, a victim of cheap foreign labour costs and a lack of demand for traditional textiles. The company's success is attributed largely to the constant hands-on approach of the Mackie family and the skill levels and versatility of their draftsmen and engineers.
We'd done spinning, we'd done weaving, we had plastics, and then they moved on to the synthetics, and the machines had to be redesigned and what have you. So it's kept going. At one time, I reckon Mackies had most over 6,000 people, because we had 3 factories. With the main factory on the Springfield Road, it was the biggest. That's where they done all the big foundry was. I made all the parts there, but the other 2 factories was assemblies and building. And you done your own packing and all the day. Well, naturally they had to pack their own stuff. But so at 3 different factories at that time, I imagine about 6,000 people there.
They built wet and dry spinning machinery. The wet spinning was more or less in the flax end of things. Flax always needed the water, for softening the fibres and things. But there was cheap machinery there too, and also the hard fibre machinery. You would see that in baler twine, which the farmers would use and things like that. Light ropes and things.
You got a job covering 1,000 components. You wouldn't know what it was. You had to drill a wee hole in it or something, and then that was passed on to the next operation. So I never actually seen the end product until it must have been about 20 years in there before I actually seen a Mackie's frame or loom or whatever they're making then, Because again, the finished product was on up the yard. They used to assemble them, run them through, take them apart, and then export them usually. 9% export in Mackie's, so it was.
People who didn't work in it, or people who didn't really want to work too much, referred it as a bloodbath. I never found it to be like that. And there were people who started off life at 14 going into Mackies and finishing their careers there, worked right through the whole time. And it was a steady job. You were sure of a job, and it kept on like that.
If you had a job at Mackie's, providing you kept your nose clean, you had a job for life in Mackie's. It was very well respected. And it was always known that if you went into Mackie's and to serve your time as a trade, when you'd served your time, you actually were a fitter or you were a machinist or whatever it was, a turner.
You got a good training in Mackies. It used to be a saying throughout Belfast. You can take a Mackie's man to Shorts. Aircraft, you can take them to the shipyard, you can take them to Sirocco, but you can't take the shipyard man, the Sirocco man, or the Shorts man into Mackies. Because Mackies worked to a fine basic 1,000. They were a very precision engineering firm. But it has never been recognised throughout the city as one of the big employers. When we hear of Gallagher's Tobacco, Shipyard, Sirocco, Shorts, plus the linen mills, but Mackies is never mentioned. Mackies was the biggest textile company in the world at one time.
Sir Bernard, James Mackie originally came from Scotland.
Well, like so many people in Northern Ireland, he was born in Dumfries. He served some apprenticeship or gained experience in building steam engines in Glasgow. Then he came across to Bestbrook to install steam engines in mills at Bestbrook. and sometime after that, he began to see the possibility of creating an industry making textile machinery, and he joined Scrimger's, which was a small textile company, and he took that over when it became bankrupt, and that really was the foundation of James Mackie. James Mackie married a lady from Rushane, and they had 3 sons. Another James, who became the senior man in James Mackies and Sons, his brother Tom, and a lady called Lizzie, who was also involved in the first company. And when his father died, he was 23, and he took the company over that time and changed the name to James Mackies and Sons. And so he was very young when he took over this empire, but he was a man of considerable initiative and drive. His brother Tom ran the factory and ran the manufacturing side. James was an ideas man and also the person who travelled very widely to get business. There's numerous stories of his travels, particularly in Russia, where it was quite tough. He went to remote areas of Russia and really had to rough it. But he got business from all over the world, and also ideas for other machinery, which was required of industry. So when he came back to Belfast, he would talk to the design side and manufacturing side, and they would increase their range of product and so on. So he really was a man who built Mackies up into a large, successful company. Because by that time he'd had married, and he'd got 4 or 5 sons who he well educated, and they all came into the business, and not in any soft way. They all had to get into the factory and get workshop floor experience. It was he believed very strongly in that, and talking to any of them, which I did when I came here, they're all dead now, but they all were practical people. They were well educated at school. Some of them went to the technical college here to get technical qualifications and so on. And each of them worked in the end in rather different areas. And they all became senior people in the firm. And towards, as time went on, of course, they were making more and more modern machinery. They, of course, provided a lot of linen machinery, but they got into all kinds of unnatural and artificial fibres and so on. And they expanded considerably.
Well, although Mackies themselves are attributed to Shankill because of the massive amount of Shankill people who were employed in all their factories, James Mackie himself, James Mackie Sr., actually lived at number 30 Townshend Street for a while before moving to 17 College Square North, where the birth of James Mackie Jr. took place. But it was James Mackie Jr. who had the vision of putting Mackies to conquer the world. I believe that James Mackie Sr. was happy with his lot, having that little foundry in Albert Street off the Falls Road, whereas James Mackie Jr. Gave up a chance to live an academic sort of life and became an apprentice within the firm. And from there on in, seen the vision, had the ideas, wanted to develop and conquer the world through Mackies. And they did that on the back of the sweat and the labour and the intelligence of a lot of men from West Belfast, Shankill and all the surrounding areas. And one of the first things they did was they moved to a bigger plant on the Springfield Road and brought the old name with them. Albert Street wasn't to die. It moved to the Springfield Road and became known worldwide as James Mackie's Albert Foundry. And that's where the real Mackie story and conquering the world through textile machinery takes off, under the guidance of James Mackie Jr., who incidentally was commonly known in brackets as the boss. There was an absolute reservoir of tradesmen, artisans, craftsmen living in the side streets who had cut their teeth in the mill industries that had been built up generally since the American Civil War in the 1860s. They knew looms, they knew weave machines, wet spinning, dry spinning frames, inside out. And now here was a firm that was going to produce brand new machinery, labelled, set, designed and developed for mills to work in jute and flax and all those things that these men who had been working maybe 20, 30 years on to start with. So therefore there was this huge amount of people waiting to go in, and instead of working on the old machinery, they were getting a chance to build and develop new machinery. And Mackie utilised that and exploited that to the very limit.
Whenever you come in the mornings, you were expected to work hard, and obviously then you had a clear conscience come the end of the week whenever you got your wages. It was a firm that you were expected to give of your best, and that's what employment's all about. You're not in there just to run around doing absolutely nothing, but people were loyal to each other, they tried to help each other, and there was some wonderful tradesmen in that company who were always willing to help the young apprentices, who in those days started at 15 years of age. Today, you can't leave school until you're 16. You've done a 5-year apprenticeship whenever I started in the company, and the products that they were produced were second to none, and most of the machines would have lasted for anything up to 25, even 30 years.
I had absolutely no idea what I was going into. I heard of Mackies, of course. I lived up the road from it, 10 minutes. But I actually going into it was an experience in itself, because you went in and it was like practically a small town with streets in it and what have you. And I was brought over in the automatic shop, handed over to the foreman, and then he handed me over to charge hand, who handed me over to somebody and told him, show him how to do that job. It was a wee drilling job or something like that there. And I'll put my hand up now. I was never really interested in that type of thing. And even 34 years later after that, I still wasn't interested in it. But then times it was a job, and that was the main thing. Quite honestly, as you go into a new place, like, you know, you're standing looking around, there's vast factories, not only one factory, like, you know, you went down, there's so many sheds and what have you, different parts of the company. But the noise alone, like, was a very noisy place. But I later found out I was very lucky getting in that department, because that was one of the few departments in Mackies where you made good money in the bonus system.
So then it was quite daunting, really, as a young lad coming into it.
Oh yes, but at the same time, like, you know, you were quickly made, people didn't know you or anything, that they were quite friendly and what have you, which was one thing about Mackies that always happened. No matter who came in, you're really taken by the hand and showing what to do. So on, you won't left standing there, like, you know.
They made sure, like, their workers towed the line. Wasn't much slackness, or, and if you follow what I mean, you were kept at your work, and it was a steady job now. But the pay could have been better, I suppose. But nevertheless, I was there, and I suppose to a reasonable extent, I was fairly happy in it, you know.
You couldn't have left their job and done it in an workshop to have a yarn with anybody, because the gaffer in that workshop, I said, what are you doing around here? The gaffers were kind of way, they weren't toppy, but they made sure you kept working, you know. But I enjoyed it all right. Now, they always, before they had a bonus system, they always played the minimum wage. And that's why a lot of people wouldn't go to it. But when they started kind of a bonus system, it was a bit better, because you could earn a couple of shillings more then, you know.
There was no tea break in it. I mean, you went in at 10 to 8, and the next time the horn went was at 12:10 for your lunch break, which lasted 3/4 of an hour. Some people would have run home to Shangle. Some that lived in and around the falls would have went home at their lunch break. But most guys just stayed. They took a piece with them, a piece box, took a piece with them, flask of tea. If you'd have been caught taking tea between 10 to 8 and 12:10, some of the foremen would have sacked you. Others would have warned you, and you knew not to do it again, or you would have got the sack. But some of them were very, very hard. Some men would have got the sack in some of the departments if they'd been caught drinking tea.
But apparently a lot of people did drink tea on the QT.
They did, on the QT, but they had to hide behind frames, which they were building, and keep their mates watching for the foreman coming. There was some of the foremen, had they have known you had your tea out, and you run back onto the job again, would have stood till the tea was cold. So you know our option but taking it and throw it out down the sink. It was no good to you. And that was a way of punishing you too. Not all foremen, but some were at those tricks. Some, if they had seen an electric kettle about the place, would have cut the wire, the plug in the electric kettle, so as you couldn't use it. That's how bad it was with some of the foremen.
You had 2 discs, and they were called checks. They called them checks. There were metal discs with James Mackie and Sons printed or stamped on them, and your works number. And you had one. It was a brass check. When you come in the morning, you handed that into the gatehouse, and then you had an oval disc. It was a silver disc, and that was the one that was a lavatory check. And you were allowed one visit in the morning and one visit in the afternoon, you know. And there was a bloke there in the toilet. She allowed to say, they call him the house clerk. So, and you know, in the toilet there was a row of boxes, cubicles, and there was only half doors on them. And the clerk, you were only allowed a certain time, you see, in the toilet. And the clerk, he would walk along and look over the top of the door to see you were doing the business. You weren't sitting there reading the paper or what. But twice a day, you were allowed, once in the morning, once in the afternoon. If you had the runs or anything like that, you had to get a pass from the foreman to go to the toilet more often.
I don't think I've ever met anybody, ex-Mackie's man, that didn't say that they enjoyed their period in Mackie's. You know, the money was poor, but like 2 nights on a Saturday morning pulled upward, like, you know, made it up level, like, you know, again. So, as I say, I never met anybody that really had a bad name about Mackie's. It was okay, very much okay to me anyway, like, you know, I enjoyed it. Although, like, I suppose there's more variety in my job because you went around, you were talking to people all day long at every level. And then, whereas if you're standing on a duckboard, like, you know, from 8 o'clock in the morning to 5 o'clock in the afternoon, it wasn't too good, like, you know.
I remember being at a meeting one time. It was actually a drawing office dinner, and James Mackie, Mr. Jim, was invited to it. Not the original James, his son. And he said that Mackies themselves they owed the community something as well. He said, look, as far as whenever I'm alive, the Mackies will never shut down because there are too many other people depending on us.
Mackies themselves were way ahead of their times with regards to recreation. I mean, they were producing a works book from something like the 1920s to keep their workers informed of what was happening. And this book went right through the Second World War. And there was letters from men who worked in Mackies who were serving in all arms of the services and were writing into the magazine and giving it Woodvale Wanderings and things like that, the tales of the ARP man, and letters from Ulster Riflemen from here, there and everywhere. So Mackies sort of, it was a family, and not only a family of the Mackies, but there was a family within the workers themselves. And Mackies produced the Welfare and Recreation Association, which gave birth to Paisley Park. And when one looks at the size of Paisley Park, it is far and away ahead of its time with regards to what other companies were doing with reference to welfare for their workers. So in that field, Mackies were brand leaders at giving their workers a recreation and sports association. Their football team won the Steel and Sons Cups in 1949, a great amateur league trophy to win, still played today on Christmas Day by teams. And Mackies themselves have produced cricket, boxing, you name it, Commonwealth boxers have come and went through the Albert Foundry Boxing Club.
And then we also had a little, like a Bible class, where a number of Christians would have gathered, say maybe about 8 or 9, to look at the various portions from the Word of God and discuss. We were a big help to one another. Like it was a good fellowship now.
And were these all drawn from the one shop, or was this
No,
different shops coming together?
They would have come from different departments. Any believer or Christian, you always valued one another's fellowship, Peter, because sometimes you were mixing with ungodly men there, and their language and all men out of them, which you were used to, you see. And you were always glad of someone else's fellowship, especially a believer, you know. And for that reason, we gathered to have a little time of prayer and to read the Word of God and to be a help to one to the other.
They had a dart league, and they had a quoit league, and there was a Bible class, and you could have got your hair cut, you could have got your toenails clipped, and the whole thing. Like, you know, it was like Stalag long ago. They had all their own wee organisations. I was on the escape committee, so I was.
When I was playing darts, we were in the store one day, and we weren't supposed to be playing, like, and this fella called Harry Johnson, and he turned around, he put his hand up on the board, and he says, "See, can you get, you know, the dart in between the fingers?" Well, I tried to do that, but knowing me, I missed it, and the dart was stuck in his finger, and he was running about me. Oh God, what have I done?
Jackie run the book, and Jackie was more doing the book. He's going in the shop, and you were back on the horses, and you just went and gave him a wee bit of paper in your name, what the horses was, and give him the money. And I got that big, he had to get somebody to help him. And I'll tell you a real funny one. Our personnel manager, Bob Gilmore, he done bets with him. He was a personnel manager. Jackie got one of the directors didn't like Jackie. In fact, he hated him. A man called Looney, and nobody did like him anyway. But Jackie got it for years. He retired. Jackie retired when he was about 56. He was getting that much money, you know. I mean, and then he was doing the book outside. You see, he done the book on a Saturday, or he sat and took the bets over phone.
I saved the company money because there was fellas bumping out, as the saying goes, for to go to the bookies, and I just saved them all that, like, you know. But it must have been the worst kept secret in Mackies, like, so it was. But
the company probably knew that because you were running a book, it's kept men at their machines rather than skiving off.
And there was mysterious bets coming down from up above, like from runners, like you knew it was from management and all, like, you know, really, like things being what they were. That was it, like. And you say my reputation has been here before me, like, you know.
There was a character in every shop, and there's one department that Jackie used to go into, were very friendly, and the fella played instruments and all, you know, and that's probably said that some of them had a TV in the thing watching the racing. Some of the things went on. The boys had it up in the store, they had a wee TV, and then they had races on. They got the 4-1 out of the shop, getting the results coming in.
Young apprentices were told to go to we had a place called it was known as the heat treatment. There was 2 large furnace things in the heat treatment where they would have heated things to make them into shape. And guys would have told them to go down for a bucket of blue steam. This boy let this thing in the blue, told you to catch it. I'm standing there for half an hour. Or they would have sent you to the paint store. They had a bucket of white and black paint, bring it back, make sure that they put the black paint in amongst the white. But don't be coming back here with it all white or all black. It must be white and black. Young guys have been down and asked for this. Sometimes the guys in it would have said, "Son, go way back, taking a hand in it. There's no such a thing." But then you realise coming back, how can I catch steam in a bucket? no such a thing as white and black paint. And you'd have went back, your fitter would have said, where's this bucket of blue steam? I need this. Or another good one was, go and get 4 anvil rings. Well, the boy would have took the hammer and hit the anvil 4 times. Told you to catch him.
There was a big fella in Mackies, and he was making a very special, you know, in a loom there's a doing that goes down to the spin round. Well, he was making them out of bars about that length, and the bar was about that length, it was that thick, and there was a furnace, and it was a chattering thing, you know, and put in the flame, and he could have stood talking to you, and with tongs, and took it out and put it in the other way, and there was a strike with the wasn't a strike, it was a go slow in the wages department, and they weren't taking it. There was no overtime or anything being recorded, and he had worked that long with 2 nights, maybe 3 nights and a Saturday, that he didn't know what his flat wages were. And when he saw his flat wages, he realised he was getting more money on the brew, as the saying goes, and he left. And they got Tom, Dick and Harry, and those bars were going in that length, and they were coming out that length, and they were coming out, and nobody could handle them, you see. And there was skids, as we call them, you know, big steel skids, and those bars went out, and they were lying at the correct length, and they were tampered. And there was thousands of skids around Mackies with all the stuff that had come out of the foundry, snow, rain and hail lying on them for to tamper them and bring them down to a certain, so that they could be initially milled or drilled or whatever. And there were skids with thousands of those warps on them, you know, in their crude form. And they gradually deteriorated. They used them up, and they had to send for Big Billy again and give him a ride. He was indispensable. He was about the only indispensable man in Mackies, apart from myself, like, you know. But he could have stood talking to you and put that in and took it out, and he got them within an eighth of an inch, so he did. But these fellows were putting them in, and they were coming out that length, and they were that thin instead of that, you know. It just shows you the wee incidentals and people that are doing wee dopey jobs, as the saying goes, and yet they were very, very, very important.
There was actually a very tragic one time. There was a lad who was killed in the yard. Whenever they had about 6 conveyors, and they put the models, sometimes wooden models, sometimes aluminium models, they sunk that into sand, and then they lifted that out, and then they poured in the molten metal. Well, whenever the metal, it was usually steel or cast iron metal. There was a slag left at the bottom of it, and these huge conical type containers, nearly like a cement mixer sort of thing, would have been filled up with slag. And occasionally somebody would have run out into the yard and said, stop, if you had been walking up and down that bottom yard, and they just bang, and the thing shot out, flames shot out across the yard. But there was a chap one day who actually got caught in one of the things, and the helmet fused into his head. He only lived a few days in hospital after that, you know.
The fella I knew quite well, he worked in the roller turning shop, and one day he was actually pulled into the machine. He was killed, a guy called David Sales. I don't know whether David was long hair then, or whether it was a jumper. You were very strict, you know, no sleeves or, you know, on your clothing and that there, and no, the long hair. But David was, sadly, he was killed. He was pulled through the machine.
And was that sort of thing happening?
I don't think it was happening on a regular basis. No, it wasn't. I think maybe more cuts and things like that there. You'd cut your finger or something like that, but, you know, you'd have done a job and you were failing. You'd have to fail it, take a sharp edge off. You'd maybe fail slip, you'd have cut yourself or something, but that there was, to me, it was the most serious, you know, especially when you knew the guy, you know.
One time there was over 600 to 800 women working in different departments during the war. Now, in my time, I'm say there was at least 400 women working in different departments. Hackle setting, plastics, and the Bakelite. Light work. But it was important work that they done. You know, they had to be careful in what they were doing too, because it was precision work too that they were doing too.
It was very dirty. It was a Bakelite. It was all like rubber and all, you know, and the smell of the rubber and all, you know. But I would have brushed one end, and time I got the other end, I couldn't have brushed it again. But I just took my time, done me things for 'em in between, you know.
And Bakelite was the sort of forerunner of plastic?
Plastic work, yes, that was plastics, yes. That was our name for it. I made him up to the store and we had powder for it or something in between, you know. Davy Jackson, he was the other boss, and mine was Jimmy Gray. And he had no girls. He used to say to me, Aileen, if I had another job, you wouldn't be on the brushing. So then it come the time, I got the machine then, you see. I got a machine.
So what were you doing with that? So you went from cleaning to operating a machine?
A big machine. Well, you made like, put the rubber in, come out like wee washers or something, you know, and then there's wee clips, wee bits you to clip off, you know, like wee bit of baiting around it, you know, clip them off. So I went on to that. He come one day and says, no, the other boss left. And he says, I'm taking over the two shops now. He says, and there's a machine there if you want to go to it. You're willing to go. So that was on a Thursday. And I says, I don't know, like, I was always a wee sewing machine with my own work, I know. And I says, so he says, I'll give you the weekend to think about it. So I went the weekend and I says, well, sure, I'll try it. It's more money. Talking to myself then, you know. So I went on Monday and told him to take it. So I never looked behind me. I got my coat out every day, what I should have done to get my bonus. And so I said, I left.
First World War, Mackies produced howitzer shells, stuff like that for the Western Front. And it's a sort of ironic thing that you think that within this area how deeply felt the Battle of Somme is, even after 90 odd years, that to think that some of the shells that were made here in Belfast were part of the build-up to that unfortunate battle. And that was the First World War. Mackies became engaged in munitions work. They survived somewhat through the 20s at a make-or-break pace, as did most people when the 30s and the Depression came along. And in 1939, the Second World War came along, and Mackies again geared themselves up again for munitions work. And in fact, in the 40s, or in the early war years of the Second World War, Mackies had 14 plants running, employing upwards of 12,000 people, producing stuff like barrels for guns, fuselages for Sterling bombers, and the tail pieces for the flying boat. Both obviously produced by Shorts, but in conjunction with Mackies. But Mackies had 14 plants, 12,000 people, producing Beaufort gun shells, which is anti-aircraft stuff. But more importantly, they produced anti-tank piercing shells. And it was put down in quiet circles that it wasn't only Montgomery that beat Rommel in the desert with the 8th Army. Mackies gave a helping hand too, because it was their shells that were knocking out a lot of Africa Corps tanks, who at that point seemed to be undefeatable. They seemed to be running riots all around the place, but once the British Army got their act together and using Mackies munitions, as well as other people's.
Apparently, when the air raids went, machines just stopped, everybody run. That was in the 39 to 45, when they were bombing Belfast. The guy that I worked with was a young man at that time, and he told me many a time they had to run. And there was fields at the back of Mackies till the air raid stopped, because at one time they believed that they were going to try and hit the factory, because they knew, their intelligence knew, that the shells was coming out of Mackies to be used against Germany. So when there were always that fear. And I mean, on the 11th of November every year, there was a bugler played the last post on the main Springfield Road from the top of the factory, because Mackie played a big part and lost a lot of men. There was a roll of honour in the Foundry Gatehouse with people's names on it who had worked in Mackie's and had went to the war and were killed at the war. Young men, and their names was all on a brass plate. And there was one also in the main hall on the Springfield Road where the directors went in. Mackie's lost a lot of men during the war years.
Well, I started before I was 14, actually, in 1940. I was over there for roughly a year in Mackies, Mackie's aircraft factory, and at the main factory, in Springfield.
So you'd come straight out of school?
Yes, straight out of school. My father, he had heard that Mackies were looking for workers, and it was during the war, and Mackies were looking for workers, and he took me along, and the foreman actually interviewed me in the gatehouse in Mackies, and he told me to start the following Monday. We made components, they were for Sterling bombers and Sunderland flying boats. Short and Harns, they made the Sterling bombers and the Sunderland flying boats, and the components were for those,
And that in fact made Mackies a target for the Luftwaffe?
Oh, certainly did. Although I wasn't in Mackies whenever they were bombed. I had left Mackies then, and but there was certainly was. There was actually, we lived on the Ballygamartin Road there, and you heard the bombers come over, and they actually turned at the mountain there, at the Black Mountain. They turned there and they did their run in right over the city there, and they dropped their bombs there, and there was a stick of bombs fell right across there. Some of it landed on Cunningham's old house on the Glencairn, and then right across the West Circular, across Springfield. Mackies were plastered, and also the shipyard, they were plastered. And then you went out the next morning searching for souvenirs. Actually, I did find a complete incendiary bomb. It hadn't detonated, it hadn't gone off, and it was about, I think it was about 18 inches long, absolutely complete, And I found that in Fidel Avenue.
And what did you do with that then?
Well, actually, thereby hangs your tail. I brought it into Mackie's, actually, and
it was still live, obviously.
It was live, yeah. We took it apart. We're daft. We took it apart. We caught it in a vise, and there was holes around the base of it, and the fella had a drift. They called it a drift piece of metal and a hammer. And he unscrewed the bottom of it, and there was stuff there inside it called thermite. It was a powder. Actually, the bomb itself was made of magnesium, and the thermite was inside, and there was a charge was there too. But they poured all it. It didn't go off, luckily, and we poured the thermite, the powder out onto a piece of paper, and then we're coming home that night through Woodville Park, and we let it. Well, let it on the football pitch in Woodville Park. Which burned, it did not burn, but sure. That's the sort of stupid things you did in those days,
Mackies were in a pole position at the end of the Second World War. They had been developing and working away at producing new textile machinery ready to be put onto the assembly lines whenever the war finished. After all, Europe was a scene of devastation. New factories, new textile factories would have to be built, the mills would have to be built. People were always going to need cloth and material of one sort or another. But Mackies had started this experimental things, and they were started looking at other fibres, i.e. man-made fibres and stuff like that. And one of the funny things, it was rumoured to say that most of the machinery at Mackie got during the war never ever went back into government circles again. It stayed within Mackies, and there wasn't a word said about it. And maybe that was a wee thank you note for the job they did during the war. But Mackies themselves, instead of like a lot of firms struggling after the Second World War, Mackies actually prospered in post-austerity Britain. They pushed ahead. They knew when the war was going to more or less come to an end. A lot of people did, and Mackies were ready for that.